Okay, listeners, welcome to the latest podcast. This one, we're going to look back at the biblical theme competition that was held at Warfare last weekend of November. So as we're recording this, that's only last week, but who knows when you're listening to it. This week, we're joined by two guests, in addition to myself, Richard and Matt. We have with us Will Denham, whose presence here will become, the reason for his presence will become apparent very quickly if you don't already know. And the one and only Ray Duggins, who of course is the person who started these MeG podcasts. So it's really nice to welcome him back as well as Will. So welcome all.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, guys. Look forward to your contributions. So the plan for this podcast is to look at the armies we used at Warfare, although Richard didn't play, but I'm sure he will be sticking his oar in his usual way, telling us why our armies were rubbish, or maybe praising Will. I think Will is beyond reproach in this particular
Oh, no, I'm very
podcast.
reproachful.
So I'm sure we can go through why we chose the armies we did, the compositions, and as well as Richard, I'm sure we'll all chip in on each other's armies. We can have an overview of our games we played and how we did, and I think maybe at the end, finally we'll have a roundup of how we think the competition went, how biblical plays out as a theme for MeG, and also a chance to see if any armies we haven't already touched on that caught anybody's eye. We could sort of mention it for you, the listener there. As ever, all the lists will be on the blog, and when the podcast is published, there will be a link there. So by the time you're hearing this, hopefully you've seen that link already. So it's a bit of teaching you all to suck eggs at that point. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. And Ray, could we start with your army, perhaps?
I literally just put a piece of watermelon in my mouth.
Okay. With my brilliant timing, I will then ask our other guest, Mr. Denham.
I'll put my beer down there.
Oh, as you see, this is going to be a really smooth and professional operation. Will, as I can see that you don't have a piece of watermelon in your mouth, could I ask you to go through your army, the Saitic Egyptian?
Okay, Saitic, or as it's been renamed, Sciatic Egyptian, due to spell checkers. So, simple reason I chose the army was it was a lockdown project. It was something that I'd started a few years back using the Pendragon range of Egyptians. But Pendragon don't do Egyptians. They do fantasy Egyptians. They do a lovely range of Anubises, or should that be Anubi, and mummies, basically. And so I was looking at that going, how on earth do I turn this into an army? And then after the last Warfare, where I was using Mitanni and did fairly horrendously badly until the last game, I noticed that Ian Newell had said that he was trying out the Sciatic Egyptians. And I looked at the list and thought, there's something in this. There's something very nasty in this. What's in this is 24 bases of hoplites, which in the Chariot period has often been referred to as scissor, paper, stones. You need something that's able to beat up Mycenaeans. And these hoplites are full fat hoplites. They come with long spear and shield cover. Okay, they've got to sit with their own commander, but 24 of them is 3 blocks of 8. Thank you very much. That'll do nicely. So there's 3 blocks of 8 mercenary Greeks who have their own allied internal commander, and he's talented. And basically their entire job was to get into enemy foot and stay there. And if there wasn't enemy foot, it was to park themselves in front of enemy chariots and worry the hell out of them. There are 2 blocks of Egyptian spears, which are basically formed close, short spear, average, nothing else. And their job was to walk alongside various Greeks and get killed because everyone else picks on them. In amongst them is a unit of superior short spears, and these turned out to be pretty effective because they get in on the long spears and suddenly they're still fighting at the same factors. They're still on green versus green, which, okay, that's lethal for most troops, but you end up with this unit that can, if it wheedles its way around a flank, is going to cause all sorts of problems. There's a unit of 6 archers who are formed, loose, experienced bow, combat shy, and they tended to get linked up with one of the Egyptian spear units and a unit of poor, untrained, unprotected, unskilled javelins, and their job was basically to hold a flank and delay whatever was coming towards us for as long as possible. And lastly, the cream of the crop are 10 bases of superior, drilled loose, protected, experienced bow, melee expert, short spear, shoot and charge chariots. And they worked like a dream. Unfortunately, all those units are already dead because my whole army is undead, just to annoy the people who are really into their historical accuracy. And that's the second reason I took the army. The only unit that is alive is my Medjal, which are historically based on the completely accurate source of the 1999 movie, The Mummy. So they're all wearing dark grey and riding horses. And they are formed flexible, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. And their entire existence depended on sitting next to a unit of chariots and being pulled along by them while in skirmish and shooting at things. And if they ever got into combat, basically they were toast, except for one game where they actually won me the game. So the command structure was talented allied general with the Greeks, because he has to have the Greeks. Talented when you're going, well, there's only 3 units. Yes, but I didn't want him to go unreliable at any point. Then there is a mediocre professional who picks up 1 spear, the not so good bows, and I forgot there's a unit of skilled bows, drilled, skilled, protected bows floating around the army as well.
Just something easy. Just forget that.
Yeah. Their job was to snipe things basically.
And if I remember rightly, they're protected as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they're protected. So
and they're not combat shy.
Fight. So a mediocre general picks up the useless skirmishers, 1 spear unit, and the bows, and basically gets in things' ways. The other Egyptian foot general gets the superior spears and average spears and the skilled bows, and those are mixed in with the long spears from the different commands. So that basically the 2 are always acting in concert, and they're trying to put at least 2 units into anyone's unit that comes towards us. And then the chariots are with the CNC, who's a competent professional, and they just go off hunting 1 chariot wing of the enemy's army. And it worked, basically. I don't know why, but it worked.
I was about to say, there's a slight note of surprise in your voice there.
I literally brought the army because I've been painting it. I thought it looked good, and I thought it would annoy people. I know it annoyed Ray very much in the last round, but it honestly paid off. I took a risk by mixing commands. Normally I would block my commands together, but I was running individual units across the table. And because they're professional and you've got the range on it, as long as you're careful, you can get them where you want. And it was just one of those moments where the perfect storm happened, really. I spent the entire weekend walking around going, I just beat someone. I just beat someone again. Oh my God, I'm winning. And it wasn't so much nosebleed territory as more death zone and on oxygen masks where I was.
I think For those of you who don't know yet, Will did win the competition, and not only won it, he won it by winning all 4 games to get a perfect score of 60. And it's a long time, I think, since we've had somebody win a competition without dropping a point. So, so that says a lot. So, okay, that's your army. Shall we pass it over to Mr. Geoffrey Cook, the Listmeister, to see if he's got any comments and about that, and maybe about the other options he could have taken with the list?
Good evening. Yes, I think Will's army is a very nice selection. Personally, I think the in terms of the choices, I think really Will has gone with the options that I would select myself. The only real alternative is to have more ordinary spearmen and archers, probably, which is I think is a weaker version of the army than the one that Will selected. Whether I would have gambled and gone for the competent professional ally rather than the talented to free up some extra points, perhaps had taken another unit of skirmishers as a result. That's obviously increases the risk of having the ally unreliable, but as Ray and others will already know, I actually think the odds of that are fairly low, and I'm usually prepared to take the risk in competitions. So yeah, nice army, and well played, Will, to win with it.
Thank you.
Ray, you played this army, didn't you?
I'm not prepared to comment. Yes, I did. So what's the format? Do I talk about my army now?
Well, I don't know if you've got any comments on Will's.
Okay, I'll give you my comments on the psychiatric Egyptians. Firstly, I'm a man of a certain age with not very good eyesight. I couldn't see what the bloody hell any of these figures were. Bunch of 10mm grey things. That's my cop. No, I'm only joking. The army was interesting because it just had a load of stuff in it. And his hoplites were full fat hoplites, so they had shove and shield cover. And I guess Will, the only weakness your army had was no loose foot of any real fighting ability. Would that be fair?
Sorry, agree with that.
Yeah, and really that was one of the things that I certainly tried to pick on. I mean, I know when he was putting his stuff down, I was thinking, Jesus, there's just so where's it all coming from? And when I was putting my stuff down, I know Will was literally saying, "Oh my God, not more of it." So it was a fantastic game, and I don't know, and when Will deployed, I thought I've got him on toast because of his splitting everything up, and it just worked. Professional generals, bit more forgiving than other armies with the command distance. Will made it work. Good, well done. I'm not rushing out to buy a psychiatric Egyptian army.
Well, I must say I was impressed by this. I mean, Will came to the competition saying, "Oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to do," and I kept telling him I thought this army was good. I played it last year, I think, Will, at one of Ray's little competitions.
And you tore me to pieces.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, at that point you had the hoplites in 4 units of 6 instead of 3 units of 8. And I think moving it to 3 units of 8 has significantly improved it. Doesn't sound a big change, but I think
it's just so brittle at the time. And honestly, it didn't do anything for the army, and it didn't even raise the break points. So just dropping them back to the 8s really made the difference.
Yeah, because if I remember rightly, I was beating some of the units with long spear cavalry.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think I would this one. No, I think it's a really nice army. There is
What's
something about.
interesting was a couple of guys at the weekend looked at my list and went, "There's really nothing in that, is there? There's nothing standout special." And you're like, "Well, not until you actually think about how you use it. It needs careful management. If you just go in with all the spears blocked together, then the Egyptians get torn apart. They have to work together. You have to go combined arms on it."
Yeah, I think it worked well. Don't know if Matt's got any comments on this before we move on.
Will and I discussed this a couple of years back when we were looking at warfare lists, and I always thought there was something in it. Not sure I'd have gone the way Will went with it, but I think Will's proved that the way he went with it worked. So not much more I can say on that. No, it's a really nice army and I like it.
Yeah, so there we are. So I think it definitely sounded like it had a plan. Ray, have you finished your watermelon now?
Yes, my mouth is empty.
Like my head.
Like my brain, yes.
Yeah.
So you want to tell me about, you want me to tell the lovely listeners about my army?
Yeah, especially because, I will say up front at this point.
No, don't take the punchline.
Okay, right, over to you, over to Mr. Ray.
So I did a hell of a lot of analysis before this tournament. And I thought, what I need is a really boring spear army. Long spear army. So I looked at getting out my Isin Lhasa again. I took that to warfare before. It's not a bad army. It's just the most boring army in the world. And I looked at that, and I had a little practice game against Jason. And Jason just went, "You know what I'm going to do to you?" And I'm like, "No." And he went, "Bang, bang, bang." I'm like, "Okay, maybe that's not the army I want to take to warfare." And but I was determined to take a backbone of long spear. And there's a really good reason for that, because I think in period, they are the troops that can deal with everything. They don't deal with everything forever, but they deal with everything. And then the other thing, okay, I knew there was going to be a number, I didn't know the number, of very shooty chariot armies. Probably because on the podcast, we were telling people to have 36 long, skilled shooter chariots, and I thought quite a few people would. So I thought, okay, so I did a bit of a Matt Hayward, I did a bit of analysis, and I thought if I have long spear and I have a load of foot skirmishers to take the ablative wounds, they're going to find it difficult. And if I go first, if I invade, I go first, I'm going to be on the halfway line, and I'm going to be pushing these chariots back. So, of course, I didn't fight a single chariot army. No, I fought one. But so my army was Phoenician. And I polished up the list, got it perfected, sent it to Nick. And he rejected it. I'm like, "What do you mean you rejected my list?" He said, "You haven't read what generals you're allowed in a Phoenician army. And you're only allowed one sub-general." So I'm like, two choices here. By the way, I'm expecting some reactions from you, like ooh and ah, or else I don't know whether you can still hear me.
We can, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like, so I look at it. You're only allowed one sub-general, and the other one has to be an internal, the others have to be internal ally generals. I'm like, oh man. Okay, so I've got two choices. I rip it up and start again and choose another army, or I just get stubborn. So I just got stubborn and went with an army which had a talented army commander, a talented instinctive army commander, a talented instinctive internal ally, and a competent instinctive sub-general. And I'll tell you what, when you've got to fit in an internal ally, which I'd never had an army before with an internal ally. So the internal ally has to take the same proportions of the compulsory troops. It's a nightmare. So I ended up with 2 units of the spearmen that come with the army, which are formed loose, average protected, short spear. I have to say, 2 of those 8s, they were actually the best troops I had, actually. They really surprised people. They surprised people. Then I had a total of 5/8. Oh yes, you heard it right. 5/8 of hoplites, but they're just formed close, average protected long spears. So they have no shove, no shield cover. They are just basic, almost proto hoplites.
It's still scary to face that massive spear.
No, it is. It's intimidating, and they were beautifully painted, and all had lovely individuals, shields, and yagga. No, they look good en masse. And then
the figures from Zach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Zyston figures painted by Zach. You can't get much better than that.
Nice.
And then I had 2/6 of chariots, which I have to say, these were amazing in the weekend. They were chariots formed loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear, melee expert, shoot and charge. So they're the same chariots. Will had a 6 and a 4, and I had 2 6s. We'll talk about what happened with our chariot battle later. And so I had those, and then I had 5 sugs of foot skirmishers, of which the majority were complete dross, poor, unprotected, unskilled. But I had 2, which were the bowmen, which were poor, unprotected, experienced bow. All of it combat shy, of course. I mean, they didn't even have tunics, these people. They were naked with, not even sandals. They were just men running around. But 2 of them had experienced bow, and that is very important when fighting against the chariots, particularly. So that was my army. I mean, the most. I mean, if I had to pick a tournament that I've ever been to, when I was had less faith in my army, obviously many times unfounded faith, but I had no faith in this army whatsoever. I had to have 2 spearmen regraded to 2 hoplites and a chariot and a sug in one of my commands. So actually getting 2 chariot tugs to work together on a flank was actually quite difficult. This army was pants. There you go.
And might be pants.
I can't wait for. I can't wait to see what RJC says. And the punchline is, I sent it into Nick redone. He went, "Are you sure about this, right?"
Okay, Richard, give us a professional view.
Final comment. No one has ever used Phoenician in a competition before. There's a fucking good reason for that.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, when I list checked it, I thought there's reasons nobody's used Phoenician before.
The thing about Phoenicia was that it was basically made up of individual city-states.
Yeah.
So there was no cohesive national army at all. By
the way, Richard, I'm not complaining about the list in the PDF.
I'm
complaining about my use of it.
But that's where the challenge with the Phoenician lies, because the compulsory elements are the chariots and the spear. So an internal ally has to have at least 12 spear and 4 chariots. So that's going to make command really difficult, which I think you experienced by the sounds of it, Ray.
Oh yeah.
I think there are subtleties with the list that you could do differently. I'm not a huge fan of the poor skirmishers necessarily. If you are intent on using them as anti-chariot troops, I actually think average ones are better if you can afford them. But I'd accept with the army composition, that's going to be a compromise. So your army was 9 tugs, which again.
It broke on 5 as well. Oh yeah, it broke on 5.
So you have to be. That's always means you've got less room for errors. Really, I noticed also you took a flexible camp, which I think is required by the list. The idea being if the Phoenicians are defending, they get fortified. camp as.
I never defended once.
Okay.
So you were taxed for a benefit you couldn't use.
It was but taxing the Phoenicians is a habit, so it's all right. So yeah. I get the Federation of City-States. I think historically it's brilliant, but when you don't notice that and you send in your army all polished up, feeling good. Same thing happened to Jason, I believe, with his list.
Yep.
So I love the historicality of it. I'm just saying, as an army to take to the tournament, oh boy, what was I thinking?
Yeah. It's a different command structure from the Saitic with its professional generals. So it's
like no other army. I mean, it broke on 5, and I only had 11 cards.
Yeah, that's quite challenging.
Most of which I must say did appear to be black.
that certainly doesn't help. Well, as Ray has already alluded to, we had the bit where he'd sent the list into me to list check, and he hadn't spotted the generals, and then he dug his heels in. Can I just praise Ray at this point, and he'll be amazed at this. Because when he found out about that, he did email me a couple of times just to make sure he got his head round what the rules for internal allies were. So I would encourage people, if you're not quite sure, ask the list checker. And then he got it right. And then it came in right, I believe, right.
But I think that shows even more that I had no idea about. Anyway. So how did the story later will be, how did the Phoenicians end up on top table in round 4 of the competition?
Well, we'll come to that, but I'll just my comment on this list is, I looked at it and I thought, what on earth has Ray taken? I must admit, I looked at it and thought, this is a victim waiting to die, and yet, where did you finish, Ray? 4th, and he was playing on top table in the last round.
I was robbed by some undead Egyptians.
Ray, it's why you rolled blank dice in the last game, because you can't kill people who are undead. Quite clearly.
You cannot kill that which has no life.
I think that must be the explanation, because. Anyway, we'll come on to that later. Don't steal the thunder.
As Rob very kindly pointed out, my army was post-mortem et gloriam.
Yes.
Yeah. But just the last comment from me on Ray is, I also say just well done for Ray. I just, okay, the only bit in his army I liked were the chariots.
They were great. I tell you what, those chariots are ferocious.
They are.
And Will tell you 4 of them can smash up anything, can't they, Will?
Yep.
Is that spoilers? Anyway, Matt, any comments on this one? I don't think you played it, did you?
I didn't, but I did play it in a practice round around Rays. Now, I had the same reaction you had when you checked the list. I thought, okay, don't see that doing too well. And then Ray just played it perfectly. He knew exactly what he was doing with it. And I walked away actually from the game and thought, well, if he plays like that at the weekend, he's going to do well with it. And he did. So he's
Hey, wait a minute. There's a thesis emerging that I knew how to play Meg.
And you knew how to play Phoenicians at Meg.
Yeah.
Let's be precise, Ray. You can play Meg with Phoenicians. We're not saying you can play Meg with anything else.
Now try it in an open competition and see what happens.
You'll probably win it at this rate.
No.
Right. Matt, do you want to go next or shall I go next?
Oh, I can go next. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, over to you then with your...
My Cushite Egyptians. It's a romantic choice. It is in no way a competition army. This army, the lead I have had since WRG 6th. That's how old that army is. It's a poorer version of the Libyan Egyptian and slightly poorer than the one that Will runs. His sciatic. Sorry. Saitic Egyptians. Basically, it's a mishmash of a lot of different troops. Start at the top.
Right, so taking it back.
Yeah, so you have the talented army commander, a requirement for this army just to get the scouting points up a bit. Then you have 3 competent instinctive generals. I'd have preferred to have a talented in there, but the points were just too tight for it. And then you go on to the troops. The date is one that allows you to take internal Egyptian troops and Meshwesh settlers. So it postdates the Libyan-Egyptian ally. So from the top, you have Cushite chariots, which are formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, block of 6 of those. Then you've got Egyptian chariots, which are drilled loose, average protected, skilled bow, 6 of those. 3 blocks of rubbish cavalry, basically formed loose, average protected, short spear. I say rubbish because they can't run away, and it's an irregular army. So anyway, I'll talk about them briefly in a minute.
They're really great in terrain, those, aren't they?
Oddly, yes, they spent almost the entire competition fighting in terrain. Genuinely.
This competition was just bizarre in places I never even knew about.
To digress slightly, against Jez and his Minoan Greeks, 2 blocks of my cavalry fought his tribal, loose, unprotected javelinman in a forest.
And one some engineering.
Well, I ambushed in the other forest on my side of the table, promptly leapt out of that forest and leapt into the next one. Because if you work the factors out, it's green, bizarrely. Because he's unprotected and disordered, affected by terrain, and I'm protected and badly disordered by terrain. So he's up 1, but he's unprotected, so it's green. So we were just sat there throwing dice at each other. all the way, whilst I wheedled a unit of skilled bowmen into his flank and then charged him. But yeah, so I digress. Sorry. So then you've got two blocks of 6 formed loose, unprotected, experienced bow, which are combat shy. Then you've got a block of 8 skilled bow, which are the best archers, literally. Then Libu militia settlement, who are formed loose, average protected, unskilled javelin, short spear, block of 6. Again, surprisingly effective. If I could get 8 of those, I think that make that unit quite tasty. Then you've got 3 blocks of 8 of the Meshwesh militia settlers. Now, these are formed close, infantry, protected, average, short spear, melee expert.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Now, as long as they're not fighting twice their number of long spear, they're pretty good. I spent my entire weekend fighting twice their number of long spear with them. They're called Invincible Meshwesh, which is a complete lie. They died in every game. All 24 of them, all 3 units were off the table in every single game. But they did their job anyway. And then you've got the filler unit, which is Egyptian archers, which are drilled loose, poor, unprotected, unskilled bow, combat shy. They've been downgraded as far as they can get to get me to 13 tugs. And then there is 1 unit of Nubian skirmishers, which are infantry skirmishers, average, unprotected, skilled bow, combat shy, block of 9.
They're your best troops.
Oh, totally. Love them. I'm almost tempted. There's an argument to drop it down to 6 because it makes them slightly more maneuverable in the combat line. Something I think Ray and I discussed at one point. I like the 9 no because it just adds that extra green dice, and as long as it's working a flank or it's hiding behind a chariot or something, they do their job quite nicely. It's oddly a counterpunch army in that it can't go on the offensive too quickly because it just doesn't have enough combat grunt to hold up a battle line for too long. It needs to pick its spot and go for it. As I say, the cavalry were the outright stars of my weekend. If we're going to talk about the games later, I'll go into detail then. But yeah, oddly there you go. Over to you, Richard. I think. Go on, tell us what you think.
So yeah, the Cushite army. If you're going to choose the option with the Meshwesh, then and you have to be at specific dates. You have to take an Egyptian subgeneral and you have to take some Egyptian infantry. then it's a and it is quite a sort of specific flavour of the Kushite army. It's probably the strongest formation of the Kushite, because the other options tend to be more focused on the Kushites themselves, and those are weakened by a large component of archers.
It's struggling. It's struggling to say anything nice about it.
It's a brave choice, I think. My reaction. I don't know if you actually considered a Libyan Egyptian ally as an option instead of the Meshwesh militia one.
The problem with the Libyan Egyptian allies, you have to take chariots, you have to take poor Egyptian foot, and so you only get a block of 16 Meshwesh, and that just worsens the combat. I don't think it works, in my opinion.
I think you're probably right, but that's about the only other alternative that's available to the army. Yeah, a brave. I think definitely a brave choice. You could have reduced the number of cavalry. You didn't have to take as many cavalry as you chose to take. But if they were the stars, then why not?
Well, he was the second most successful Egyptian on the weekend, so
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning also you did take a unit of the Nubian skirmishers, which gives you a few more files of skilled bow shooters.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
So sorry, I
like this army because it brought colour to the table.
that smacks of damning with faint praise there, but obviously Matt is an extremely good painter, so
beautifully painted. It's beautifully painted.
Yeah, I've always had a soft spot myself for the Meshwesh. I mean, I think the invincible bit goes back to at least the DBM days, doesn't it, Matt, and possibly earlier.
Oh, it dates to WRG 6th, where the entire army could be A or B class fanatics, including the skirmishers.
Oh wow!
It's one of those classifications. I was actually discussing this at the weekend, that nobody's quite sure where the invincible Meshwesh quote originally came from.
We're fertile mind of Phil Barker.
Yes, we're just hoping it wasn't.
I mean, I tell you what, this army. Sorry to interrupt, but if the Meshwesh are so great, aren't there armies where you can have a shit ton of Meshwesh?
Yeah, sea people.
Well, the Libyan Egyptian,
sea people,
the obvious one.
sea people. I mean, short spear melee expert. I like short spear melee expert.
Yep.
Point for point, they're the most effective in the game.
Yeah.
As Paul Cummings tells us regularly.
Yep. Yeah. I have to say, Matt in our game, not at the tournament, in a practice game, did try the hide my cavalry in a wood trick, and it didn't work.
That doesn't work when the ambushing command gets black and white cards for the first 4 turns.
Yeah.
I think
that'll do it.
Most commands don't work if you get black and white cards for the first 4 moves. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to when we get round to a bit of chatting about the games, about this concept of the cavalry as the terrain troops. I must admit, it's intriguing me no end.
It's novel.
But why not? Anyway, shall I move on to my army?
No.
Nobody wants to hear. Well, it's already been on one podcast, because when we did the Bronze Age collapse one, whenever that was done, this is the army I came up for it. So I went for Hittite Empire. Really on the reason that, as I said at the time, I've always had a soft spot for them for reasons I couldn't tell you. In terms of a sort of high chariot, middle late to late Bronze Age army, I think other armies do it better. Mitanni, for instance, because they get better infantry. But I said, I've always liked Hittites. So anyway, my army, I had 3 competent professional generals and a talented, instinctive Anatolian ally, internal ally. That's the one where you can have a Hittite sub-general commanding the Anatolian contingent, but and it's the same points, a competent professional as talented, instinctive when it's ally. But I went for the ally basically to get 1 more card. I wanted 13 cards, not 12. So that's why I went with that. The army itself, poor unfortified camp. So sits at the back and hopes nobody gets to it. Started off with it always goes in the army list, the Golden Chariot fighters, 6 bases of drilled loose chariots, exceptional protected, skilled bow. Why wouldn't you take them? Then 4 units, each of 4 bases of Hittite chariots, which are basically the same but superior. A unit of Hittite spearmen, drilled loose, average protected short spear, 9 of those. 2 units of Anatolian chariots, formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow. So not as good as shooting, but being superior, they are a bit resistant to skilled shooting coming in. A compulsory unit of Anatolian spearmen, who I downgraded to poor, they're tribal loose, protected, short spear. So those were my tugs, just 9 tugs, and that's quite deliberate because I wanted a good chunk of skirmishing foot. Got 3 6s of skirmishing archers, average unprotected, experienced bow. Same again in sling, and then in the Anatolian contingent, a 9 of experienced bow, combat shy foot archers. So the idea of this army, obviously it's basically a shooty mounted army, which everybody knows I like, is to get out there, gang up the shooting. The idea behind the 5 units of skirmishing shooters is that for a relatively cheap cost, that gives me a whole chunk extra shooting that I can gang up on the opponents. If you're facing off against a similar sort of, say, New Kingdom army, New Kingdom Egyptian, that didn't have those skirmishers, you can add to your other shooting capability and basically hope to shoot down with extra white dice.
nikgaukroger keeping Fletchers in business since before the Bronze Age collapse.
Absolutely, yes. So I always floated the CNC, so the two professional generals could get the cards they needed, hopefully, and fortunately they did. And the ally is pretty self-contained. You've got 4 cards for 2 proper tugs and a skirmisher tug. Skirmisher tug? I don't think so. Because the tribal infantry is going to sit at the back and hide. So self-contained, 13 cards worked really well. It also gave me scouting 4, which was it's a little bit more than quite a lot of the armies in the period. So that was mine, and I found it worked really well. Suits me, which I think is important with an army. So anyway, Richard.
Well, I think you ought to say where you came with it, Nick.
Oh, okay. I was runner-up to Will.
That's one up.
But 6 points behind him. 10% of his score behind him. Yeah. So it obviously worked. Can't say it didn't.
Yeah. So the Hittite Empire falls into the category of the superior protected skilled bow chariots, 2-horse chariot armies. The Hittites can go for quality because they probably can't match the sheer number of skilled shooters that Mitanni, for example, can put into the field. As mentioned, the Mitanni can have better quality infantry in small numbers anyway than the Hittites can achieve. So it's the Anatolian option. It's perhaps giving a spoiler away, that will become optional for the 2022 lists. There's a list change spoiler for people. But it's
what you can't see, ladies and gentlemen, is Nick dancing around the room.
I'd still take it.
There you go. The other option, which never quite works in my opinion, is the Syro-Canaanite ally option for Hittite Empire. The Syro-Canaanites sort of dragged down a bit with the compulsory foot in their allied components, which reduces the amount of territory that you can take. Yeah, I can see it's an army that Nick would like to use. It's the sort of army I like to use as well. Yeah, the quality with the superior skill bow, if you are facing somebody like myself who tends to downgrade the chariots to average to get more skilled shooters, then you're going to have an edge in a straight up contest of shooting there.
I would say just back to that, if the Anatolians becoming optional, that probably improves the army if you want to have more infantry in it. You can probably get a more infantry-based army, although my personal view is why would you want to with a Hittite? Again, you'd go Mitanni.
Probably yes. Anyway, so that's the Hittite Empire list.
Any other comments on my list, guys?
No, remember it from the previous podcast we did, and it was going to do what it was going to do very well.
Yeah, it was out of your comfort zone. Doesn't look like anything you usually run, honestly.
Yeah. all those foot skirmishers, Nick. What did you do? How did you know what to do with them?
I sort of winged it a bit.
He pretended they were dismounted cavalry.
Yeah, I think I did basically. It's a sort of, you have to treat them partly as expendable, but yeah, you want to keep them in the game as long as possible to get as many shots, but don't get hung up if somebody's going to run over them. So
sounds familiar.
It does indeed. Okie dokie, perhaps we move on to a bit of people give us their summary of their games. This is the how the armies actually work in practice. So perhaps we start again with Will.
Right, so unfortunately in the first game I hold the unique distinction of breaking my opponent's army twice, because I'd spent the last few weeks painting like crazy Roger's chariots for his 5 hegemons, and then with about 30 feet to go to the front door of the conference centre, I dropped them.
Oh no!
Plus a Mitanni army that I was lending to another Richard.
Oh.
So our first game was rather fraught and delayed because there were 3 of us sitting around the table with bottles of super glue, reassembling 3 armies worth of chariots. So
you do that.
Poor Roger, and I do humbly apologise to him.
He took it very well.
Yeah, he was. I've seen paler corpses when I told him what happened.
And for a man whose army was entirely dead, that's saying something.
Yes. Now, Roger basically deployed with only 2 generals, a legend and a talented general. And he had a bunch of chariots under the talented, of chariots.
Will, what army was he using? Sorry, I don't think we said
5
that.
hegemons.
The 5 hegemons from the Chinese.
Yeah. So his chariots are awesome. They are superior polearm, devastating charge, and also get to shoot. Now, my chariots were genuinely changing their underwear at this, if Egyptians wear underwear. And he's got 6 units of them, but he's got them in 4s. Now, that's proved problematic because it made him quite brittle. Because they're missile armed, they didn't. So suddenly he went from this almighty juggernaut to these chariots that were sitting there going, well, we'd like to go forwards, but we want to discuss terms before we do.
Unionized.
Yeah. So we went for it. And his chariots came forwards, 2 sides of a village that I put down. And his infantry were basically stuck guarding the camp with no one to command them. They were left out of command range because he's only got the 2 generals. The idea being the superior chariots with a legendary general smash through the opponents, and then the other group of chariots come round the flank and chew you to pieces. Unfortunately, that didn't work because I was able to evade and pull him out and apply what Paul and Nick would call chaos theory to him. So his groups of 4 chariots were finding themselves being shot down by my chariots and my MeG cavalry. My bowmen basically lurking behind blocks of hoplites, because I went with this mixed deployment that I came up with, were able to pick him off as well. And eventually I took him down 15-4. It was a lot more bloody than that. It wasn't as one-sided as it felt. He had a lot of my units teetering. But, long spear against his chariots, it was really interesting. There's a quirk in the rules there, boys, I think we need to look at, where you don't get mounted polearm on the charge, but you get it in melee.
Yeah.
So he didn't get his devastating charge, but he didn't get his polearm, but he got devastating charge and superior. And then he got polearm superior. So I was often on greens against him. But actually managed to hold out.
Does he get devastating charge against long spear?
No. But
you just said he did.
Yeah. He can have the shatter effect from it.
Yes,
he gets
the shatter if he gets it, but he doesn't get devastating charge.
Well, inevitably the shatter was always going to be the last file.
Yeah,
it always is. I think it's in the rules somewhere.
Yeah. For superior troops, which was, a bit of a shock to him, I think.
Yeah.
So I was able then to throw, get stuff around flanks and things as well, because even though he had masses of carts, they never seemed to come up right for him. So slightly reeling from the smell of super glue. Came out of that on 15-4, and my next opponent was our great and beloved leader, Mr. Simon Hall, with New Kingdom Egyptian. We ended up with 3 large blobs of terrain smack in the middle of the table. So we had 2 lumps of rocky ground and a village sitting right in the middle of the table. Perfect for 2 chariot-based armies and long spear armies, really. What really took the wind out of his sails was the previously mentioned poor combat-shy, unskilled javelin, unprotected skirmishers got in amongst these lumps of fallen masonry. When you see my blog when I get round to writing it, my terrain is fallen pillars for rocky ground.
And very nice too.
And sat there taking on 18 other skirmishers for about 5 turns.
Yay! Go the rubbish troops.
Standing behind them is my unit of combat-shy loose bows going, well, we're just going to stay here. We're fine. We don't mind. So he was bringing through 3 units of Egyptian spears to try and get to my camp. And this 1 unit of skirmishers is basically holding up half his army. On the left, he had 2 blocks of chariots, which I sent I sent 2 units of spears after, basically. And they spent the entire game, my Greek command, chasing chariots. Eventually, we caught 2 of them because they were pinned up against his camp. On the other flank, he had 2 units of Egyptian bows, loose, combat shy, that one of which was coming through the village, the other one was supporting his chariots. He had 2 units of superior chariots that were basically hunting down my chariots, because he was in 6s and I had a 6 and a 4. As Ray pointed out, the later Egyptian chariots are brutal, and my 6 went through his bows in a turn on the charge.
Nice.
My 4 basically stood there facing off against the other 2 chariots going, please don't shoot me, please don't shoot me, please don't shoot me. Eventually, he caught the 4 and destroyed it, leaving my Majel, my unprotected combat-shy cavalry, standing in front of 2 units of superior chariots. They should have been toast, because they're still in skirmish as well at this point. I just never had the cards to turn them back into their formed self. And Simon charged them and contacted them and killed 3 bases out of 6, leaving me with, severe brown trousers, shall we say. But at this point, my superior chariots came round behind him, hit both of his chariot units in one turn, and broke both, leaving my Majel standing there going, phew, what happened there? Which kind of signalled the end, really, for the new kingdom of Ramesses II, because at that point I could pick off his spears and I could pick off his other chariots just as I wanted, really. So that battle was won by 2 units of skirmishers whose entire job was to stand there and not die. I then spent the rest of the night driving home and walking around the house going, I've just beaten Simon Hall. I've just beaten Simon Hall. I've just beaten Simon Hall.
With your family going, what's he on about?
Yeah. My lieutenant's going, oh, shut up, I want to watch Strictly. So, still in shock the next morning, I'm up against Lance with my senior Minoan, which is long spear, some long spear, a few long spear, and some long spear. The inevitable javelin troops, a lot of bow-armed skirmishers. His long spear didn't take integral shooters, so we could have even more troops on table. And then 2 4-packs of heavily armoured superior long spear chariots and 2 6-packs of short spear chariots with unskilled javelins. This was an example of me putting combined arms into the spears. Every one of his spear units I tried to hit with at least 1 Egyptian foot unit and 1 hoplite unit. And basically, my dice rolled wounds, his missed for most of the game. He deployed his 4 wide, 2 deep, whereas my spears were 3 wide, and then either one file of 2 and 2 files of 3. So I had a reserve to put in.
Yeah.
Once you lose that second rank of long spears. And that's the problem with long spears. Once you lose your second rank, you're toast. And again, my superior short spears got round a flank and just chewed up his line once it started to collapse. Eventually, it went down to 15-6 because he managed to pick off 2 or 3 units of my Egyptians, but my Greeks just held on and held on and held on until the Egyptians got round, and then we chased down his chariots on the other flank and caught one and shot the other one to pieces. He got my skilled bows by basically throwing every skirmisher he had at them and then throwing in his javelin armed troops afterwards. It was just like, I'm having that unit. I was like, yeah, I'm going to let that. I can't do much about it. I haven't got the cards to move it right now. My general's busy fighting elsewhere. But yeah, it was a hell of a game. It was real knife edge stuff until the moment his spears started to fail. And then, once I could see it failing, it was like, right, where to put the pressure in with my boys, and it works again, which left me on 45 points. And because I'd already played Cy Hall, he had Cy Hall. He had the unfortunate job of fighting Nick. More on that later. Which meant I got the next one down the list, which was, hello, Ray, that's you.
It's true.
I don't know if you want to double team this now, Ray. Feel free to.
Do you want to do yours, Ray?
Well,
and then we'll do ours together at the end.
What we could do is talk about how I got to that position and then talk about that game.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, Ray. So,
all right.
Build up tension. Drum roll, please.
Yeah. So no drum rolls. I'm going to talk about my first game. I apologise to my opponent. I've got no idea how I beat him. He had he had the Minoan and early Mycenaean, so he had 6 units of long spear in 8s that were shield cover integral shooters. He had a couple of units of chariots with javelins, which were probably his weak spot. Well, they were his weak spot. And one of these charioteers in Dendras, which maybe they're better, maybe they're fatter to deceive, but formed loose, superior, fully armoured horses, long spear. And then a couple of units of or a unit of Libyans, infantry, tribal, loose, average, unprotected, experienced javelin, fleet of foot, and then a unit of archers, infantry, tribal, loose, poor, unprotected, experienced, bow, combat shy. Guess where they went? Right in front of the camp. So it actually, if you think about it, with many hoplite armies, it was going to suffer from the same thing. We did have the chariots to protect the flanks. So Nick mentioned earlier about scouting. I didn't say that my army had PBS of 6, which is so relaxing because you've got to use all the cards, and you have 1 card for every turn in the PBS, and then scouting of 3 because of all my skirmishers. So it meant that I was always going to be okay in the scouting, maybe not against the bloody undead, but I was always going to be okay. So I outscouted Keith, and who, by the way, is a perfect gentleman, and he's going to be a ferocious competitor of Meg soon. So I had a pretty good sight of his deployment, and I was putting down last. And basically, my plan was the way he'd deployed, he'd put a unit of the chariots on either flank. And his chariots, I'll say again, were formed loose, average protected, experienced, javelin, short spear. So my chariots one-on-one are going to eat them. But then he's got the Dendra. So he deployed with them as the fire brigade in the middle, with their own general. I approached on the flanks with chariots on either flank, making him choose which flank he was going to go with the Dendra, which he did fairly early. And then I went hard on the other flank and killed his chariots. And then what I was trying to do, so set the edge so there was nothing that could, and then, bring the chariots back and hit him in the rear. And basically, I've got to say, it was green, and he had shove, and I was beating his spearmen. So what can I say? I can't claim it was a game of skill. The funny thing was, though, I mean, he broke on 6, I broke on 5 because I had such a shit army. I broke him, and then he said, "But do we do the cab test?" There was a cab test. I said, no. Once I've broken you, the game's over. And I think if we'd have gone on another turn, he would have beaten me, definitely. So I apologise, but I haven't had a good start in a tournament for so long. To have 15 points just felt great. So I'm not going to claim great skill. Not really. But there was nothing in his army that frightened me, because the Dendra, if I wanted to bring some spear up, I could. I had better loose troops than him. I'm not saying my army was a Swiss Army knife, because it was a rubber-bladed Czechoslovakian knife. But it at least had bits and pieces that you could do different things with. So I got 15 points, and my reward was playing Hammy with his early Libyans. And the last time I played Hammy, we spoke too much. We talked too much. We got about 2 turns in. So we literally said to each other, no chatter. Well, that's almost impossible with me and Hammy, but we really kept the chatter down to a low point. And he's got scouting of 5, so I think I just lined up my army, and then he just. But to be honest, deployment for him is a real nightmare, because he's got to try and fit it on the table. So he's got 6. I can't even remember.
His army is
26.
That's it.
Ugs.
Yeah.
13 thugs.
Tugs.
Okay.
13 sugs, wasn't it?
Yeah. And yeah. So anyway, I just saw where his he deployed. I saw where his baggage was. The terrain was perfect for him. But you make your own luck. He had a lovely piece of terrain, a lovely piece on the right, and so he had better loose troops than me. So I just picked, and I sacrificed any movement with my hoplites and put the chariots together. So that's what I had to do to get the chariots together. If my chariots were going to be together, 2 units of hoplites weren't going to move. So I just charged him with the chariots. Support, everything went forward as much as it could, sort of, and then my loose foot went to engage his Sea People's ally. That was a good idea, and smacked the chariots in, and it worked out quite well, to the point where in one turn I had one unit. This is no word of a lie. Okay, I had 1 unit of chariots hitting some of his foot, so it's a tug in the flank, and 1 unit of chariots hitting a tug of foot in the rear in the same turn. That turn, and this is it, because if I get through, I save my loose foot from the Sea Peoples, and I cause chaos. And I think, could I win the game? Well, I tell you what, I could have won the game. So I charged these bloody chariots in, and so I'm rolling a bucket of red and yellows. I mean, a bucket. This was like 40k. And I roll these buckets of red and yellows, and I get a wound on each tug. I mean, I literally wanted to cry. But I thought, no, come on, Ray. Richard tells me that it all evens out. The dice even out. They even out. So melee.
Do they, Richard?
Melee, a bucket of red and yellows in melee, because he couldn't. He's tribal, as far as I remember, or. Yeah, tribal. So he's not turning round because he doesn't have the cards, and I'm pressuring him in other places. So I've got it again. I've got the buckets of dice again. 2 wounds. It's just like, come on, it's got to change. So basically, the unit of Sea Peoples that I hit in the rear with my chariots, which are pretty damn tasty, and they're loose and all those things, right? 3 turns to get rid of them. So
dice do even out. They just don't even out when you want them to.
Yeah,
that's like, property is always a good investment unless you have to sell it.
Yeah.
You might have had a tear in my eye during that game. It was that just and it kind of like, wow, I basically, my head went down a bit, and I don't know, maybe I could have scrabbled around and try and do it, but he's got so much. 15-10, I was happy with 15-10. I know Nick had a really good go at beating it, but it's a beast. It's a beast. By the way, I'm not one of these people who's going to start saying, "Oh, it's got to be changed." No, it's got all its weaknesses. I have to say, and I think Hammy, if he was on the podcast, would agree, he got the absolute perfect terrain setup, which doesn't, you can't rely on that. And
he did it a couple of times against a couple of people.
So that was it. It was a fantastic game. It was cinematically, it was a fantastic game. Watching it as a neutral, it must have been a fantastic game. It was not very nice for me, rolling all those dice, reds and yellows, So anyway, so that was that. So I think my next, I don't know if we found out that night, but I think the next morning I was playing a New Kingdom Egyptian army, and it was being driven by Ian Newell. And I felt a bit sorry for Ian because in my head, I had played this game 50 times because I built my army to beat shooty chariot armies. So it just was perfect. It couldn't have gone better. I mean, I can't remember what the score was. 15-4. He was lucky to get 4, and I'm not being nasty. It was over in an hour and a half. It just was horrible for him. Everything I did worked. The army was set up perfectly to deal with that. I mixed I had the skirmishers in front of the hoplites to take the ablative wounds. I had the chariots mixed with in between the hoplites. So if he came any minute, I mean, it was just horrible. And I just got him to the edge of the table and then smashed him. And it was over in an hour and a half.
Oh, blimey! So yeah.
But that's not.
You had the plan.
He did everything. He came way too far forward with one of his chariot units at the start. And I didn't even. He was a bit surprised because I thought he was like, oh, he's gonna charge me and I can evade. And no, I just lined up loads of shooting and just shot it. So the army came to life. My army came to life in that matchup. But it's not surprising because it was kind of designed, if design is the right word, to fight that kind of army. So 15 points. So I'm on, because of Simon having already played Will, I'm on top table. And my calculation was, although I never knew because we weren't told, and why would we? I think if I beat Will 15, I get 15 and he gets 10. I think I win the tournament because I beat him head to head. So the the other thing doesn't count. No idea whether that's true, but that's what I'm saying to myself.
It's a good plan.
That's what I thought was going to happen.
Yes, so I think I need 15 points because then Nick can't catch me because I was already 1 point ahead of you or something, wasn't I, Nick?
You were ahead of me at that point, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think something like that. Anyway, so if I beat Will. I think with 15 points, I think I've won the tournament, but might have been wrong about that as well. But I had to beat Will, whatever happens. That's what I needed to do. And so we can now talk about our head-to-head on top table. We were both in nosebleed territory, really, being on top table.
Yeah. Well, I came into that game knowing that I'd never beaten you.
Really?
Yeah. So I was sitting there thinking, I am just going to enjoy this game and enjoy the fact that I got 45 points. And this is probably my best result for many years with an army that I wasn't expecting anything decent to happen with. But I'd sort of worked out that, hold on, I now know how to beat hoplite long spears. I can just do this mixed command thing and it seems to work. I can just go in mob-handed, or you can change the M to an N if you really want to. And somehow,
are you a teacher? Because I think it starts with a K.
Yeah. Just like Knuckles.
I think it starts with an N in the Warhammer 40k.
Yes.
With the orcs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So his army's morphing from undead to orcs there.
But basically, I somehow managed to out-scout Ray, who put me on the defence, which I don't mind because I've played defensively all weekend. Given a choice, that army was designed to go defensively and to go second. So I'm sitting there going, okay, let's see what he's got. And somehow I got 60% out scouting on him. And I've only got 2 cards for my scouting. I've got
and
two
also,
reds.
but can we also say by this point, he's already completely confuddled me because he starts putting loads of terrain down, and I'm like, what is he doing? Why is he putting loads of terrain down?
Because I like terrain.
Yes,
also,
there you go. That's as good a reason as any in a wargaming tournament.
It also narrows your army choices down to where we can fight. Well, that was the plan.
Okay.
So my plan was to have lots of terrain, force you to come in piecemeal, and maybe get a couple of units before you completely destroyed me.
Yes.
Didn't quite work like that, did it?
So yes, so I was out scouted. So you had a good look at my army, but you did keep going. Oh my God, he's putting more down. So
yeah. It was just spear after spear after spear after spear. Oh, and some skirmishes. It was just like, what is this?
Yeah. But at deployments, I don't think any of us, neither of us had out deployed ourselves.
No.
And we hadn't out deployed our opponent. The only thing is you had to move your hoplites fairly sharpish to cover your centre, else I think, if I remember rightly. But no, it was Will's mixed in deployments, because I looked at it thinking he split his hoplites into 3 separate. I'm like, how's this going to work? But he didn't have to move that quickly. He was going to counterpunch.
Yeah.
But no, it was good, and I think if my side of the story on this, because I think you should say it last, you as the winner. My side of the story was I tried really, really hard. I got flanks.
You lined up 2 beautiful flank charges.
Which
rolled S's.
Yeah, which Will hadn't seen coming. All I can say is my central command, which had 1 unit of chariots. The chariots didn't move the whole game because I just got blacks and whites with the literally, didn't I, zebras?
Yeah.
And I just couldn't. They were still there at the end in exactly the same position they started in. And Will picked his spot, and his hoplites ground me down. They won him the game definitely because they had the shove. We both deployed 3 wide with the extra guys behind.
Yep.
But he had the shove, and you think such a thing. I don't know what shove costs, 7 points or something, but it makes all the difference when he just hoplite against hoplite.
It does when it isn't the last dice you roll.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean,
and
the thing was, I had my 2 units and my skirmishers. So my combat shy bows, one of my normal short spears, and my skirmishers were standing off to the right with their commander, looking at your army, going, "I hope he doesn't notice us." And it took you about 4 or 5 turns to work out, hold on a minute, if I just go in and kill this lot, that's
true.
Point.
It's true.
But you got quite tied up with the centre, I think, and how to try and beat me there. Whereas actually you were beating my chariots, you broke my big chariot unit, you got my small chariot unit of 4 down to 2.
Yeah, it was a wound off breaking, and it broke my 6. And then it even survived a cab test with not getting. It was just like, oh come on. So actually, the way we're describing it could have gone either way this game.
Yeah, and you were nearly in my camp at the point where you went collops.
Yeah.
So,
but can we talk about my dice, because it's good to have a witness.
Yes.
Can we talk about my dice?
What was it? 18 on the trot without rolling anything.
So greens and whites, mostly greens, 18 rolls, not a single wound.
Whereas I was wounding on most dice. I at one point, I seriously thought I was going to end up eating your dice.
At one point, I had them all in my hand. And if we hadn't been in such a posh venue, I was going to launch them.
from the 6th floor, that would have been impressive.
Yeah.
You'd probably killed the RAF reenactors on the 1st floor.
Yeah. So, and I had to kind of bite down on my tongue and get myself back in order. But no, there was it was I don't know. I had a great time, but it's just I'll say one last thing, right? Will outplayed me. Even when I got him on the flanks, he recovered. But it's really difficult to win when you roll dice like that.
Yes. I mean,
that's all I'm going to say. Because I don't want to
Ray,
detract from Will's victory because he deserved the win. But boy, it's difficult to win.
I will say I was expecting to lose that one. And, and like every other game apart from the one against Roger, I came out of the game in shock going, I think I've just won this. So, thank you very much for an amazing game. And it was,
cinematically, it must have been, it was a fantastic game of MeG. And all the things that we love about MeG were in that, including you have to ride the good luck and the bad luck. And I mean, be philosophical about it now because it's about a week later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds great. What can we say? So,
playing a game. Look, guys, playing a game, round 4, top table, everything to play for. What an honour! What a privilege!
Yeah, it was amazing. And as I said, I was just going to enjoy that game, whatever happened. And unfortunately, your dice happened, Ray. So,
but I'd say the tournament, the trophies from the warfare Reading guys, the trophies were beautiful.
Yeah. Perhaps we can come on that later, right?
I didn't get one. I didn't get one, but they were beautiful. Go on. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So it's our story. So
we will mention those later. As we wrap up, but I think thanks, guys. I mean, that was really really good to hear that a game on top table was so good and potentially so close. And either of you could have won the whole competition. So,
I think that's fair, isn't it, Will? I'm not exaggerating.
No, I think you're downplaying yourself. If anything, mate, you could have completely creamed me there. So well done.
Okay, cheers. I'll take that.
Over to Matt now to talk about his and for the listener out there, Richard is still here, and we will drag him in later. But I think at the moment he's just taking the chance to have a beer while the rest of us talk. But Matt, over to you. Give us an overview of your games.
Right. To start, from the way the Cushite's built, it needs terrain basically to give it a fighting platform, shall we say, because it's a lot of bow and rubbish cavalry, frankly, or not so rubbish cavalry, depending on how you look at it. So, first game was against Lance and his Minoans, which Will fought. Now, Lance has quite an interesting take on this. He doesn't take the maximum 48 long spear; he only takes 32.
Yeah,
and that allows him to run 2 basically equal wings of blocks of 6 experienced javelin short spear chariots, and he supports that with either loose order archers or skirmishing archers. Then you've got the block of spear in the middle, and Lance had flagged it quite early on that basically he has 2 blocks of 4 of the Dendra armored charioteers, so superior long spear, fully armored boys, and they sit directly behind that spear wall, and he marches forward, the spear wall opens up, contracts basically, and they become the sporting elements for whatever you try and put into the long spear. So I knew that was going to happen. So the train lands. Unfortunately, I got nothing in the center, which not great, but there were a few bits on the flank, a couple of forests, I think, on either flank. So 2 blocks of my cavalry immediately went into a forest, into ambush. Now, unlike when I played Ray in the practice game, which he alluded to earlier, I made sure that this command had enough, that it was under the army commander, so I was having 4 cards. So there's a fighting chance I'd be able to get them out of the forest before somebody went in looking for them. And then it was a case of putting the mesh wesh on the other flank, left center, and leaving 2 blocks of chariots in the middle to basically slow down his spears, and the game kicked off basically. I think Lance was unpleasantly surprised when 2 blocks of 6 cavalry appeared in front of 2 blocks of his skirmishers and 1 block of chariots, which meant that eventually I took the flank. Took a little longer than I was expecting, and I had to put my drilled chariots close to one of his long spears to stop them interfering. And to be fair, they did their job. It was the classic, he charged me, so I two sculled and wounded him on the shooting. So his intact his intact block of 8 long spears was suddenly looking a little wobbly, and had to back off quite sharpish. But Lance played it as I expected, and he played it well because it's Lance. Basically, my 3 blocks of meshwesh tried to delay his long spears in the middle, but basically the overlaps and the central core were his chariots, and of course they're throwing, I think, yellows versus my whites because of their superior fully armored in melee, and he just cut through the meshwesh. And he then was able to turn onto either of my flank units and wiped me out for a 10-15 in the end, I think.
Oh, well, you got the 10?
Yeah, I got the 10. I was quite pleased with that. The lack of terrain meant I didn't think I was going to win it. It was just a question of pulling the points out of it, which I managed. And then I thought, oh, let's see who we're going to play next. And it was Pete Entwistle with Minoan.
A lot of sympathy from Ray there.
Yeah. I think he actually cursed it before the competition started and actually said, "You're just going to fight Minoan." Sure enough, he paid the gods.
Well, there were 5 of them or something across.
It could have been worse. You could have fought the Arcadians or whatever they were.
Yeah, I fought them in the last round. I'll get to that in a minute. Thanks, Ray, for bringing that up.
I genuinely didn't know that.
Matt now has an allergy to long spear.
Yes.
He's in therapy now.
Long spearitis, yes. So Pete Entwistle, now he went for the more classic 48 long spear, which left him with less additional troops, but of course it was still built around the core of the 2 blocks of 4 fully armored charioteers and the 2 blocks of 6 shooty chariots. Basically, once again, no terrain in the middle to speak of. So, but there was flank terrain, so that worked out okay. Again, it was a similar deployment than before. Basically, I concentrated as much of my army on either wings as I could. The cavalry was deployed back at the camp because there was no, I think I'd gone with rough terrain, 1 forest on the other side, which really wasn't that useful to me, which oddly I put my skilled archers in, simply to give him a tough. Yeah. The thinking behind that was, that
was the thinking. That pause. That was the thinking.
Yeah. No, the reason the skilled archers went in the flank in the forest was I actually wanted his rough terrain troops facing that forest, and that's assumed where they were going to be. So the chariots were next to the forest. The aim was the chariots were to go forward, delay his long spear. My cavalry was to make a right turn, go through the forest, and come around his flank. That was the idea, and that's actually what happened. Once again, my cavalry spent most of their time in the damn forest, going through it and round. And the position of, the lumberjack, yeah. But the position of the skilled archers in the forest meant that if he tried to send his good chariots up against my chariots, they were risking skilled archers stepping out of this forest, and shooting into his flank whilst he's got chariots to front. That was the idea. So he had to spend cards basically to neutralize archers in the forest, because the skilled archers are not combat shy. They are unprotected, but they're in the forest. So if you send long spear into there, it's actually an even fight. Actually, it's no better than an even fight. I'm actually up. Yeah. So so in the end, he'd have to screen it, but couldn't go in and fight them. So that was the idea. So, it kicked off. I had a unit of Meshwesh on one flank that was trying to play with his chariots, and his light foot was on that flank, basically keeping them occupied. They were charging forward, and his centre came forward, which was all the long spear, obviously. His 2 blocks of 4 chariots came out to play with my chariots. but they got a little too far ahead of themselves. They charged my Cushite chariots, who evaded, skirmished back, charged them again, and they skirmished back. Problem with that was I didn't skirmish far enough, and he hit me, but left him open to a flank charge from the rubbish cavalry. The shooting on the way in caused him a wound on each. The cavalry, because of the order the charges went in, they went in last, hit him in the flank because he'd already contacted my chariots at that point, and went through both units. Because he'd already taken a wound, the cavalry hit the first unit of chariots, broke it immediately, destroyed it, and just went into the next unit, broke it immediately, and destroyed it. So at that point, his nice combat his combat units had disappeared in the center, and he had cavalry coming around the flank of his loose order infantry, and it was all looking a bit tight. I think I took the loose order infantry, but we ran out of time, unfortunately. It doesn't sound it, but it was quite an involved game. On his other flank, for example, his chariots butchered a unit of Meshwesh in shooting. Absolutely butchered them. They were down to 4, I think, after about 3 turns of these, just trying to catch them, basically, because I don't have shield cover with those, so they just get shot to pieces. But they did the job anyway. I think that was 10-8 to me on that one. So I devastatingly average so far. Going into round 3, I'm going to give you no guesses on what I thought. A Minoan army.
Does it begin with M?
It did, yeah. I had chariots again. This time, unfortunately for Jez, I thought, the terrain did land really nicely for me. I had 2 rough-going hills in the center. Really was not what he wanted to see at all. And then I think we had forests on both flanks. So it basically gave me free choice to what I wanted to do. I put, for fairly deliberate, for various obvious reasons, the 2 blocks of 6 archers I don't mention much because they're really there as filler. They're not adequate to fight unless there's a piece of terrain they can stand in. Now, rough-going hills, they really like. And so 6s, and there's not that much shooty stuff in a Minoan army, so I'm quite happy to sit them quite forward in this rough-going hill. Short spear, close order foot are also remarkably effective in rough-going hills if they're fighting long spear, close order foot, because he gets no long spear. I'm up a hill, I'm short spear, so it's massive pluses. So Jez ended up basically with all his spear facing off against these rough-going hills and my Meshwesh and my archers. On the flank in one forest, my cavalry did their usual classic, sat in ambush, along with. So if you imagine a nice big circular forest, at the front you've got 2 ambush guards, which are, well, it's actually 3 ambush guards because you had the two cavalry on the outside ambush counters, and the inside one was the Nubian skirmishers of 9, and then behind them, actually deployed, was again the skilled archers in the forest. You kind of think I'd have learned not to put in the forest. You do realize they have bows and they're supposed to shoot. They'll be fine in the woods. So, and because of the way the forest is like, so once again, there was this big circular forest, my cavalry ambush, and a big circular forest on Jez's side, which he rather kindly deployed his 2 blocks of Libu unarmored, fleet of foot, experienced javelin, but they've got no combat weapons. So the major battle plan was the cavalry, the skirmishers, and as I said earlier, and the skilled bow were basically to sweep into this forest, try and gut it, and fall onto the flank of his long spear, whilst all the Meshwesh either held on the hills or came forward to engage his long spears, and that's exactly what they did. And it all went to plan. It just, yeah. I think Jez was quite shocked when this cavalry bolted out of this forest and went straight into the next forest after his infantry. And the combination of the skilled shooters, and it did not end well for his. And as has been alluded to earlier, with as Will alluded to earlier, that long spear, once they start losing their ranks, it becomes quite ropey for him, and that's what Jez had a problem in the middle. He was deployed, as Will saying, you have a block of 8, but it's deployed 3, 3, and 2. And Jez had just had the most appalling luck. The one that died every time was the one in the middle, the 2. So he was always losing off in the middle, and basically the Meshwesh actually did what they were supposed to do, and they cut their way through the long spears. And with the combination of his flanks failing to the cavalry in the forest fight, it all went a bit wrong for him. Unfortunately, it was a 15-2, I think.
Brutal.
Yes, it was. It was. He was a little unfortunate on some of the dice rolls because the skilled drilled chariots also did, even on whites against his long spears, didn't seem to be able to miss, and they just made a real mess. So that was that one. And as Ray has mentioned, the Arcadian, that was what I fought in the last round. It was Sunday by then, last game Sunday, and I think my brain had stopped working at that point. How do I describe it? It's just wall-to-wall long spear mixed in with skilled archers.
Yeah.
It was an open table, so there was no. Well, that's not true. There was some terrain, but it played no part in the game. So I was relying on trying to get the Meshwesh to cut through a fair block of the long spear. Now they are unprotected long spear, so once we get into melee, it's actually really nice for the Meshwesh. But the mix he used of skilled shooters just did enough damage that I couldn't face the number, because he was 9 tugs to break. So you can imagine it was a big old army, and it was a mix of formed and tribal close order foot, and he played it well. And he's got a couple of loose order guards, superior melee experts for fighting in terrain, so I couldn't even touch him there. And long story short, he ran me over. He attritioned me to death basically, and I forget what the precise score. I think it was, I came away with 8. Yeah, it was 8. I killed 4 of his big spear blocks before the army crumpled. Good game though. So there you go. I went to fight chariots and fought 4 spear armies. 3 of the same. I really wanted to face Keith in the last round with his Minoans, just to do all 4. But
we could have had Mark Spratt as well.
Yes, yeah. But
we could have arranged a 5th round for you. Yes, a special 5th round for Matt, so he plays all the Minoans.
Yeah, I was by the time I got to Jez, I'd really got a handle on how to deal with these pesky Minoans. They just kept coming.
So that was it. If you'd had a Minoan in the last game,
that's exactly.
You'd have been better off. But the damn draw got you. Okay, I'll gallop through my games, partly because I am blogging them as well. So it is. So my first game was against Jez, who you've just talked about your game with Jez. So he's got a Minoan. He's. I think the difference with his army compared to some of the others was he had the 2 units of Dendra. 2 4s of the Dendra guys, superiors. But for the javelin armed chariots, he had them in 3 4s instead of 2 6s, which I think is more common. We played on a fairly open table. He had a wood on his right into which he could put his Libyans. There were a couple of pieces of rough going just sort of in the middle of the table, but weren't really doing much. Other than giving me somewhere to put my skirmish infantry, of course. Jez basically put his infantry on the right and his chariots on the left. I think he somewhat hung his chariots out to dry. There was a distinct gap between the end of his spear line and the chariotry. I deployed a good chunk of my chariots, including my exceptionals, on my right, which was facing his chariots. And nearly all of my skirmishing infantry was there as well to add their firepower. And basically, I put the ally with its experienced shooters and the 9 of skirmishers to face off against his spearmen and basically just slow them down. Plan: crush the chariots with my firepower and exceptionals, and then turn on the spearmen. And basically, that's how it went. up to a point. And the point being, I destroyed his chariots. Quite early on, I got one of my superior chariot units could make a flank attack on one of his dendry units, broke it in the impact phase, pursued straight into one of his javelin armed chariots and broke that in the impact phase as well. Excellent. 2 units down for basically no losses. I don't think I even lost a base doing that. And then for whatever reason, it just took a bit more time to finish off his chariots. And essentially, I ran out of time to turn on his infantry. So, I don't think Jez quite knew how to handle the chariots plus skirmisher army. I think in his mind, I think he needed something solid to get those spearmen into, which makes sense. But basically, at the end of that, we ran out of time before we could get to a result, and I won 12-8. That's win as in I scored more. It has its uses. It puts you slightly off the pace. You don't meet the people who have just scored 15. So it's sort of it's not deep periscope depth for submarining. It's sort of a shallow submarining approach.
Torpedo depth.
Torpedo depth. Thank you. See, my history runs out about the end of the English Civil War-ish time. Everything after that is modern. So I don't know these technicalities. Yeah. So second game, a game against Paul Cummings. We play quite frequently in competitions, and I think we're running at about 50-50. Paul had got New Kingdom Egyptian, quite a similar army to mine actually. He's got his Pharaoh's chariots as the exceptionals. He's got as many chariot units as I've got, but all of his are skilled shooters. He's got a couple of units of infantry, one of bows and one of close fighters, and 1 unit of skirmishing infantry. So I think the main difference is that I've got this massive skirmish chariots. We fight on a basically open table, but on my right, around about the centre of the table, there's this big piece of rough going. I outscout him, which is quite nice. I outscouted him quite heavily as well, because we basically got the same sort of scouting. Is always a bonus. So he's set up with his chariots sort of more or less across his frontage, his infantry at the back, because he doesn't think they've got much of a role, presumably. I mass a lot of my skirmishers to go through the rough going to hopefully turn that flank by their shooting. And I've got my rest of my chariots basically mirroring his. I've got a big gap in front of my camp, which is my camp is basically protected by the Hittite infantry, and Paul opposite those. Paul has his exceptional chariots, so that could have gone a bit horribly wrong. The game essentially boiled down to Paul's chariots couldn't hit a barn door with their shooting, and I could. The massive skirmishes on my right meant I got a distinct shooting advantage on that side. He initially pulled some chariots away because he didn't want to face that massive shooting with them, especially as I was sitting in rough going and he couldn't do anything against it. That's sort of what it boiled down to, really. I could maneuver my chariots to get little advantages here and there because my shooting was being better than his, and I had more shooters because of the skirmishers. He barreled his exceptionals straight at my camp. I did put the Hittite infantry in the way and managed to get them close enough so he could only hit them with 1 file. And then in melee, his exceptionals did very little, and then I got a unit of my chariots on his flanks and charged into it and broke them. And
Nick, Ray's got to drop off the call in a second, so I don't know if Ray's got any last comments he wants to make before he.
Oh yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I messaged you on the chat. It's sort of a bit out of sequence, but I thought the location was fabulous where Warfare was. We'll never go there again, I don't think, because we got some kind of COVID deal, I think. And then I think playing chariot armies with beautiful chariots is so cool, and we shouldn't lose that. in our calendar in a year, whether it's warfare or somewhere else. But we should not lose biblical from our so that's my that's my
completely agree. Sight of mass chariots is good.
Yeah.
Even you sort of map playing all those Mycenaeans, they look different from other stuff as well with a big figure of 8 shields. No, I completely agree with that, Ray.
Yeah, and I noticed on Monday there were people coming to the Facebook group saying, I saw you guys at Warfare, and that's what it's about, to grow. So I do apologise for having to go a little bit early, but what a lovely treat to be back on the podcast. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for coming along. It's been an absolute pleasure, Ray.
See you at Ribble Rumble. Oh, I do have one more thing to say.
Please.
We have sold 35 tickets for Ice and Fire in January. We have 1 ticket left. So there you go. Listeners, Ice and Fire in January in the middle of the country at Battlefield Hobbies. 35 people already committed. We've got 1 ticket left. Go and buy yourself a Christmas present. Ta-ta for now. Bye-bye, chaps.
Thank you, Ray. Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Ta-ra, Ray. Sorry, Nick.
No. Thank you, Matt, for flagging that. I'd missed Ray's message. But obviously, thank you very much to Ray. I think it's been great to have him back on, actually. Okay, I'll just crack. We have taken a reasonable amount of time. I'll nip through the rest of my games. I say I beat Paul 15-1. He picked up a skirmisher somewhere, which was, I think very harsh on Paul. It's just one of those games, really. I think my army did what I planned it to do when I designed it. So Sunday morning, I'm doing reasonably well, and I get hammy with the blob, the Libyan blob, all 26 Uggs of it. What can you say when you're faced by that? Well, Ray obviously said a few things earlier.
I say lots of things, but they're unrepeatable.
Well, it's a certain degree of that. I think it's an army you can almost guarantee getting 10 points off, because it's got so many targets for you, but breaking it it can be hard work depending on your army. Anyway, we ended up playing on a fairly open table. We just had 1 piece of terrain that was of any interest. The rest was completely open. Somewhat fortuitously, to say the least, I did out-scout Hammy, despite the fact he's got more scouting cards. Not by a lot, but just enough to give a little hint. I mean, it's hard to describe his deployment, but basically up front are 13 Sugs in a big long line facing you. They're all shooting. They're all experienced shooters. Just over half of them are bow, so they are shooting further than my chariots can shoot. It's a heck of a lot. His tugs aren't particularly dangerous, apart from the 3 sea peoples, one of which is superior. I decided to play this one quite cagily. I wasn't going to throw myself at him. I wanted to make Hammy do some work, and hopefully bring some of his Sugs close to me, so I could get to them. And if he's had his tugs screened by Sugs, hopefully I could push the Sugs out of the way and then shoot into his troops with my skilled shooters, which I did manage against the sea peoples. For all my army is quite mobile and quite dancey, it actually operated fairly straight up and down most of the way. It's a game I find hard to describe, because certainly the first couple of moves were surprisingly cagey. Hammy did say afterwards that it was the 2 armies he'd played before that had both had 12 cards. Whereas I had 13, and that extra 1 seemed to make quite a bit of difference in how he could manoeuvre his army, which was nice, because I deliberately made a choice in the army to get to 13 instead of 12, so that sort of justified that. When I did get to shooting, I did quite well. I mean, for instance, my first shot against one of his sea people's units knocked 2 bases off. I did get a flank charge on his superior sea people's unit, which, whilst it didn't do a lot of damage, sort of pinned it in place, and I could shoot it with more, because get it on one end, but it's 4 wide. So I was shooting at the other end with some skilled shooters and some skirmishers. Some charges elsewhere ran down some of his skirmishers, because having so many skirmishers, Hammy was quite happy to have them skirmish away, even if charged by chariots, in the hope that they would be eroding me with their shooting, instead of running away and trying to reserve them. So I caught a few like that. And so
I think his policy is plenty more where that came from.
Exactly, and it's absolutely true. By the end of the game, he's swarming around one end of my line, where I'm trying to hold the line with the ally, and in the end, the ally just goes, "Oh, sod it, I'm going to charge," because otherwise we're just going to be completely swamped. And that picked up a couple of units. And in the centre, my golden chariot warriors just went forwards, following the example of Paul's in the previous game, just barreled straight forward. I think in one move he had something like 9 white dice shooting at them and basically did nothing. And then I crashed into a unit of bowmen and started killing them. The game ended 12-7. I think I could have broken his army, but it would have taken, probably at least another 3 moves after it wasn't going to happen in any competition time scale, and I would have probably been teetering on the edge. So, but overall, it was a really interesting game, fighting something that's really quite that big and quite difficult to get at, because basically you need to break 7 tugs, and you've got to get past 13 tugs before you do that.
I think at one point Hammy and I were chatting, and he said that he can give away 26 points before he breaks with that army. Essentially, yes. You could almost, if you could score that much, you could almost score 2 complete victories before he breaks. It's a tricky army. I felt the more cautious approach to attacking it was the right way, but different armies, different things. So that set me up for the last game against Simon Hall, the author, the man himself, another New Kingdom Egyptian. This time he'd gone for a sort of combined arms army. He'd got a reasonable amount of infantry, 4 6s of chariots. To get what he'd wanted to, he'd had to downgrade his chariots to average. So if we go into a shooting match, they're still skilled shooters, but I have that advantage there. He outscouted me. Comes a shock to me. It's a long time since I've been outscouted. But the table again was fairly open. There was a wood on one flank and a bit of rough going. I could start my skirmish infantry in. But basically the armies are quite balanced. But he's only got 10 cards. His command structure is a talented C&C and 3 mediocre. So I've got 13, so I can play the discard game and hopefully get some advantages. Yeah, although Simon's a good enough player to be able to mitigate quite a lot of that. Yeah, probably uncharacteristically, Simon started with a move that somewhat set the tone for the game. He rather cavalierly pushed a block of infantry, 2 lots of spearmen, flanking a unit of unprotected archers a long way forward, double moved them forward, which allowed me to move a big block of skirmishing archers to within 4 to shoot at his bowmen. So and when I shot the next turn, I got 2 skulls and 2 wounds. So took 3 bases off him in one shot, and that sort of rather stymied him. Elsewhere, so it boiled down to a bit like Paul. His chariots couldn't hit barn door, and because I was superior, his skilled shooting wasn't as effective as my skilled shooting against him. So I was whittling away his chariots. In the centre, he also got confused about which unit was my exceptionals. He thought it was the unit next door to the one it actually was, which again sort of threw him a bit. Ramesses' corps is in trouble for that one.
Yeah, Ramesses' spies really didn't spot the fact that the exceptionals are the 6 base unit, not the 4, and they're all got armoured horses. There were some clues there, and of course, fine.
And the big neon sign going, "We're exceptional."
We're exceptional. You could possibly tell by the way they're just barreling forward at you as well. So the exceptionals and another chariot unit just piled through the middle, killed 2 chariot units of his, and sacked his camp.
Oops.
So taking out the archers eventually as well, and another infantry unit, his army broke on 5, got me the victory. So, I think in the combination of Simon, certainly his first move mistake, which he, as soon as when he'd made it, and then I moved my skirmishers up, he went, oops, I was a bit cavalier there. And then the discrepancies in the shooting, because of the different qualities, sort of set the tone of the game, and I won 15-3, which Simon says is his heaviest defeat in MeG. So I'll take that any day. One. So yeah, those were my 4 games. I finished 6 points behind Will in second place. Got a nice trophy. All in all, I was really pleased that the army sort of worked as I had planned it to work. And for anybody who's really interested, I will be blogging on these, and Will said he's going to be blogging on his as well. Okay, just after that, aware that we're running quite long for one of these, but I just wondered if Richard had got any thoughts on, just pick up on the bit that Ray said there about biblical competitions, how they work, how MeG works for it, and if any of the army lists outside of the ones we've talked about caught your eye, because I think I circulated them earlier.
Indeed. Well, I think biblical competitions work really well in MeG. I'm a big fan of the biblical period, or Chariot period. So I think you get a nice range of interesting armies that look good on the table, and give some very interesting matchups in games. On the side of warfare, I have to say the one thing that did surprise me was the lack of any sea people's army, which I would have perhaps expected might have been present, but
I know 2 of the reg players were planning to bring sea peoples.
Yeah, I think that would have been an interesting mix amongst.
There were also a lack of Assyrians as well, which last time kind of dominated. So,
yeah, I think these things go in cycles, don't they? Especially if you've had a competition where you get a lot of one thing, you sort of get a reaction against it in the next.
I think also Assyrians are actually quite hard to use, so perhaps not so surprised about that. As an option. In terms of the armies that were selected, I have to say I think I mentioned to Rob Hutton and his Vedic Indians, which is a very interesting choice. The list is quite interesting, first of all, because it can have elephants. So you can have up to 4 elephants, which in a Chariot period army competition is quite interesting. You also get the heroic charioteers, who are perhaps not so interesting as superior protect experienced bow, but have the option of dismounting with a dismountable characteristic as form loose superior protected two-handed cut and crush, which have the potential to cause, and you can have up to 24 of those, so you have the potential to cause quite a bit of havoc with those. I think, to be fair to Robert, he hadn't had a chance to practice with it, and it's perhaps not the easiest of armies to use, but I think it's certainly an interesting choice, and it also looked very pretty as well.
I suspect once he's got a bit more practice with it under his belt, it's going to do damage.
I like the look of it when I was checking it. I must admit, it's an army list I've looked at before and thought, meh. And then when I actually looked at the actual army he'd come up with, I went, ooh.
Yeah. So he managed to get 11 tugs out of it with 3 skirmishers, 14 cards, 2 talented, 2 competent. Yes, a nice, interesting army there, definitely. I just mentioned, because some of you may be aware, I used Mittani at the LGT Open. There were a couple of Mittani armies at Warfare, both of them a bit different from mine, focusing more on the on keeping the chariot superior, but one of them in particular also mixing in some Hittite allies, I believe.
Yeah,
which was
Peter Cross, wasn't it?
Yeah, an interesting choice. I have to say, I do feel Mitanni is actually one of those armies that might be better in an open competition than actually in an in-period competition. Just because people don't, in an open competition, aren't picking armies with shooty chariot armies in mind.
Yeah,
as
one of those turns up, it's going to really upset you.
Yeah.
Well, you finished 7th, was it, at Skull Rollers?
Yeah, 7th. So LGT, yes. So the Skull Rollers event. So those would be my army selections as mentioning, worth taking a look at, and quite interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, all in all, I thought it was a really good competition. I mean, like Ray said, and like you said, I think I like chariot competitions. I think it's different having the chariots. Just the visual is different. It's nice. You get different things, you know. So, yeah, I'm certainly hoping that we continue to have a chariot period in the calendar, because it can be difficult to squeeze everything we want into the calendar and still without trying to get a competition every weekend. So, but yeah, hopefully we can keep a chariot competition in there. And am I right that next year Warfare is moving? Because
indeed, the Warfare will be moving to Farnborough, to the conference centre at the airfield in Farnborough. So that will be the venue for next year.
Okay. So again, should have a reasonable amount of room, I would have thought.
Yeah.
I should believe so. But certainly plenty of parking space. So.
Always a good one. Okay, I think we've probably run for as long as our listener wishes to listen to us go on. Hopefully they've enjoyed hearing about the various armies and about the games, some of the odd things that happened in them. You know, Matt's prevalence for putting his cavalry in woods. certainly, I'd put that on the list of tactics that I hadn't thought about before.
Yes, I can see his chariot, his cavalry being rebased just as trees.
Could do that. So, and you know, obviously, again, really well done, Will.
Thank you.
Top result. You know, 60 points, 4 triumphs. You know, you literally cannot do better than that in a 4-game competition. So,
and I think it's congratulations to the both of you for beating Simon as well, just to keep his ego in check.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. we knew it was going to happen, didn't we, Will?
No.
No, I didn't either.
No, I didn't.
I must admit, I was shocked when he made the first move he did. It was such a mistake that he did. Yeah. Anyway,
Well,
as may have been suffering from a little rust, so maybe he won't be quite as easy to beat in the future competition.
He said with me that he'd set up a very careful trap for my chariots, and I just ignored it.
I am quite happy to kick a man when he's down. in terms of playing Simon across the table, but it was a good game. And anyway, so as Ray mentioned, our next competition is only it's about a week or so away from the date we're recording this, where some of us, all of us, I can't remember how many of us, will be up in Stockport playing what's basically a medieval competition. And I am not taking horse archers. I'll just get this one out straight away. I am taking Lusignan Cypriot. And you can all go away and look it up. It's in Francocratia.
I'm taking early Lithuanian.
Nobody is surprised.
Although I wish I could take a caption camera shot of Richard's face as I said that.
Yeah, lip being bitten was quite interesting.
Yeah. So
I will be running, because I had a look very carefully at the criteria, and I'm running my Sengoku Samurai, which haven't been out for a while.
I'm about to say they haven't been out for a while, have they?
But they always have a lot of fun when they do.
Indeed. Are you with us, Richard?
I'm afraid I will not be with you.
Oh, no.
That was one journey a bit too far, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I wasn't sure to begin with. Yeah, and then I filled in a slot when somebody had to drop out. Yeah, and then after that, of course, it's the holiday season. So we might all be looking to buy ourselves Christmas presents of more lead.
Waiting for the inevitable sale of a certain manufacturer.
I might be as well. Partly because I've sort of been tempted, thanks to Martin using it at Warfare, for Sumerian. It's one I've sort of had a hankering after for a while, and if a certain manufacturer has a sale again, I might finally give in on that one.
And just before I go, does anyone know how to use a canary army? Because I managed to win one at Warfare. Unprotected long spear. Help.
Move very quickly. Don't hang about.
Don't wait to be shot. I think definitely.
I have used them as part of an Inca army, as an ally, and put them on the flank and whizzed round as fast as I could get them around. And it certainly caused Robin some problems.
I did notice they got fleet of foot, and I was thinking, how on earth do you get that going?
Well, paint it up, give it a run. Okay, folks, I think we should wrap that up now. So thank you everybody for participating. Obviously, thank you, Will, for coming along as a guest. Thank you to Ray, who had to leave us a bit early. And we shall hopefully get this up as soon as possible. And see you all again in various places at various times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.